All right, welcome everybody. This is episode 6 of the Tide Hoops History Summer Podcast Series. I'm your host, Michael Southern, and I can't tell you how much fun this has been so far. And we have been so blessed to have such great guests. And for this week's episode, the tradition continues. We have a fantastic guest this week. Most everybody is familiar with him as the lead analyst for the basketball program for the Crimson Tide Sports Network, and he is also a former player at the university. So very excited and delighted to welcome Bryan Passink to the podcast this week. Bryan, thanks for joining, and how are you doing today?
Michael, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I've enjoyed listening to your podcast and appreciate you having me on. And listen, I'm always happy to talk about Alabama basketball, but there has never been a better time to talk about it than right now. So appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, you are absolutely right. I never would have imagined that in the months of, well, May and June, that the attention that Alabama basketball would be getting from both the anticipation for a season that's months away for recruiting and all that. So it's just unbelievable. I do not remember any other period like this. I don't know about you, but how do you view things right now as far as the excitement with the fan base and the anticipation?
Well, listen, I mean, you and I, we've been around Alabama basketball for a long time, and there have been peaks and valleys, and there's been a lot of passion, one way or the other, around this program for decades. But I don't ever remember a time where it's been like this. And there are a lot of reasons for it, obviously. Coming off the school's first ever Final Four, possibly a number one preseason team coming back, maybe the most talented team in Alabama basketball history. And in my opinion, if not the best coach in college basketball, one of the top couple of coaches in Nate Oates, playing an exciting style. So a lot to be excited about. I mean, listen, if it was just the fact that we're coming off a Final Four, that would be enough to generate this type of excitement. But I think the fact that this was not just some aberration, this is not a one-time deal. This is where the program is. Alabama basketball is where we've been in the past a little bit, from the standpoint of this has been a nationally relevant program in the times of Wimp Sanderson and at times over the course of the program. But to be coming off of a Final Four and to be where we are from a roster standpoint, and maybe more importantly from a coaching and coaching staff standpoint, the excitement is at an all-time high, and I couldn't be more excited about it.
So there's a lot that we can get into as far as the anticipation and also reviewing or looking back at the Final Four team. But I kind of want to step back a little bit because I want to highlight you because you're a guest. Kind of the things I want to touch upon. I know you played high school basketball in the state of Georgia, right, in the Savannah. Did you play for, was it Benedictine Military School? Is that who you played for?
I did, yeah. Grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and played at high school there, and I always had dreams of playing major college basketball, and wanted to play in the SEC, ACC, and had an opportunity. My last two schools that I was deciding between were Alabama and Georgia. And listen, growing up in the South in the late 70s, early 80s, or in the 80s, and then I graduated in the early 90s from high school. The best basketball program in the Southeastern Conference was Alabama and the Plaid Palace and Wimp Sanderson. And this was a time that, as you remember, Michael, Kentucky was on probation. They weren't on TV, and Alabama was dominating the league. They called the SEC tournament the Wimp Sanderson Invitational, Sweet 16 after Sweet 16. And when Alabama called, Greg Polinsky was assistant coach and met with Coach Sanderson, who's still a good friend today. When they offered me a scholarship, I couldn't have been more excited. It was a dream come true to get to play, to get to come to Tuscaloosa and play for Wimp and Coleman Coliseum. And so I was fortunate. I was able to play great players over the course of my career, and still obviously love it and thankful to be affiliated with it. But yeah, it's quite a few years ago, but those are good times.
Well, that's one of the things. There's definitely a new generation of Alabama basketball fans, especially with the renaissance and the excitement of the program from the last 5 years. But as you hit upon, The tradition of Alabama basketball has been there for a while, and it spans not just one or two decades, but several in the 30s. And then, of course, the Rocket Eight, you had them in the 50s, what Sam Newton was able to do in the 70s, and of course, of what Coach Sanderson did. Let me ask you this. So your recruiting came down between Alabama and Georgia. Uh, and I know you said that you're right. In the 80s, Alabama, as far as consistency, was probably the best program in the Southeastern Conference. Now, when you came to Alabama, did you play 1 year for Coach Sanderson, and then of course they had the transition, and then you had 2 or 3 years under Coach Hobbs? Isn't that how it worked?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So played for Coach Sanderson my first year, and listen, was sad to see him go. And then Coach Hobbs took over, played for him for 3 years, and played with some great players. I came in as a freshman and got to play with Robert Horry and Latrell Sprewell and Hollywood Robinson. Jason Caffey and I came in together along with Roy Rogers. So some great players. Eric Washington came in. Antonio McDyess. He was on some of those later teams the last couple of years of my career. So we talk about these times are the best that we've ever had, but the history of Alabama basketball is you've been able to put a spotlight on it in this time. There's some great players to come through this program and going to have great success in the NBA as well.
So you touched upon something I wanted to ask you about because you were fortunate. You were teammates with a lot of great players. You came in at the end with Robert Horry and Latrell Sprewell. Those were two NBA players, two first-round NBA players. And then you got to play with Jason Caffey, Antonio McDyess. Let me ask you this: the years that you were with, well, when Antonio McDyess came in, when he first came, that first practice that you had with him, what were your impressions of Antonio? Because I always thought the first time I saw him play, I was like, he's NBA ready now. He's probably 18 years old.
Yeah, listen, he's one of my all-time favorite teammates. And it wasn't just because what he did on the floor. He's a great guy off the floor and still is. I'll tell you a story. I've told this before, but when I guess I was a junior, and Antonio came in as a freshman, and we had not had a practice yet, but we were playing pickup and just workouts and sitting around at Bryant Hall having lunch or dinner. I can't remember, but it was 5 or 6 of us just sitting around the table, and we're talking hoops. And Antonio said he was asking some of the upperclassmen, do you guys think I'll get to play any this year? And I remember laughing, and I wanted to give him a hug because, listen, guys come in ultra confident, and they come in and everybody, thinks they're going to be one and done or all American and all the average this many points. And McDyess, so humble, came in and said, you guys asking us older guys, you think I'll get to play some as a freshman? And I remember laughing, just looking at Antonio and saying, getting to play, you're our best player. And he was like, oh, come on. Like, we all knew it. Like, this guy's the best. He's a great player, works as hard as anybody, and just a humble guy. And it's a big reason for his success. He was ultra talented, ultra athletic, hard worker, but just a great person that wanted to be great. And the cool thing about McDyess is when you look at his NBA career, played on an Olympic team and had an outstanding NBA career, but he had a serious knee injury fairly early on in his career. Had microfracture surgery. It took away a lot of his athleticism, which is what he was known for. But he still went on to have a really solid NBA career, even losing some of that athleticism because he worked so hard on his skills and got stronger, and his basketball IQ was off the charts. So he came in. I was lucky to play with him. I was on that team in '95 where McDyess just kind of blew up, and the college basketball world, the basketball world got to see what we knew and what we saw in practice every day. I think in the SEC tournament, we played Arkansas, and he goes off for 35, something like that, 15 rebounds. NCAA tournament against Penn, I think he had 39 points, 19, 20 rebounds, and did the same thing in the second round against Big Country in Oklahoma State. Unfortunately, we lost that game, but all of a sudden, McDyess went from this guy that we just kind of knew about, and guys like you, Michael, knew about in Tuscaloosa, to all of a sudden the overall second draft, the second pick in the NBA draft, second overall, which was the highest and still is, ties Brandon Miller for the highest ever draft pick in Alabama basketball history. But got to play with some great players, but hard to beat Big Mac. He was the best.
So what I remember, you talked about it, his sophomore year. You're right. He went in and had a great SEC tournament, but no one was thinking that he was going to shoot up the projections on the draft boards. And then you're right, the Penn game, he displayed everything: offense, defense. He was a one man show on that one. Even though I know the game went into overtime, but then you're right. All of a sudden, I remember the buzz started circulating. Like everyone was like, "Wow, where did this Antonio McDyess player come from? Look at the size, the agility, the athleticism, the defense." And then next thing you know, how could he not go to the NBA draft? Because they were projecting him to be a top. Well, he was the number 2 pick, but they were projecting him to be a top 5 pick easily. And we were all thinking, we were all thought, Antonio would come back for his junior year, because I think the next year Alabama played Syracuse. And they were looking at like a big man matchup with him, and I forgot who it was for Syracuse, but that fell through. But let me ask this: I have another question too. So during your playing career, what was probably one of your most memorable games from the team standpoint? Would it be the '94 upset of Arkansas?
Yeah, there were a lot. I mean, my freshman year was the Elliott Washington shot in the SEC tournament to beat Arkansas. Yep. I mean, an epic game, one of the best college basketball games of all time at the BJCC in the semifinals. Just a back and forth game between Alabama, Arkansas. Incredible. I mean, everybody that was there remembers, Todd Day, Lee Mayberry, Oliver Miller, Robert Horry, Sprewell, Hollywood, and then Elliott Washington. I think only had 3 points.
That was his only points. Was the game winner.
Yeah, big three to go on and beat Arkansas. And what an incredible memory that was. And I remember we were staying at the Sheraton connected to the BJCC. It took about, I don't know, it seemed like 2 hours. We walked back because traffic was so bad. We walked back to the hotel, which is, basically connected to the BJCC. It took forever, but high-fiving fans, and everybody was so excited. Got to play in another SEC championship final. Unfortunately, lost to Rick Pitino and the Kentucky Wildcats the next day. But that was an incredible memory. '94, as you mentioned, we beat the number 1 team in the country in Arkansas, the eventual national champion. And for those that remember that game, we were struggling. I mean, that was a team that was limping into the SEC season, having lost to, I think, College of Charleston and South Carolina in the first, I think it was maybe the second or third SEC game. Number 1 Arkansas comes to Coleman Coliseum and able to beat them behind, of course, Antonio McDyess and Jason Caffey. And that propelled us to another NCAA tournament. And then the game that we've already talked about, that '95 Penn game in the NCAA tournament, as a senior, advancing in the NCAA tournament and having opportunity to contribute in that game. Obviously, that was the Antonio McDyess show, but to be a part of that, there's something that is, as we all know, that's special about March in the NCAA tournament. And to grow up dreaming of playing in the tournament and to have a role in a big game, overtime game, to advance, something that I'll never forget. So many great memories. But when it comes down to it, I had great teammates, great coaches, and it was just a special time and special to be a part of. And it's a big reason why I love the university the way I do in this basketball program.
So a couple of things on those games. Coach Sanderson always says that semifinal game against Arkansas to him is the greatest SEC tournament game ever, even though, that wasn't a championship game. And of course, he always said that, after that win, the team was just emotionally and physically spent and had nothing left in the tank for Kentucky in the championship game on that Sunday. And then you're right, the '94 game against Arkansas, if I remember correctly, Alabama came into that game 3-5, and you're right, had some tough losses. And I remember nobody gave Alabama a chance to win that game. And then just out of the blue, You had Artie Griffin step up. You guys took them down 66-64, and then that turned the season around because you came back strong for the SEC conference schedule. And then you're right, you got back in the NCAA tournament. So that was a remarkable turnaround by the team and Coach Hobbs with your backs against the wall. So do you even remember, was there anything special Coach Hobbs said before the Arkansas game? Any special pregame speech?
I tell you one thing Coach Hobbs did that helped us win that game is he sent. And this was it may have been, I don't know if it was a couple days before or a week before, but Antonio was a little homesick. We were losing and wasn't sure he wanted to be at Alabama, and went home for a couple days. And Coach Hobbs sent James Green to Quitman, Mississippi, and told him, "Don't return without McDyess."
Oh my goodness!
Was able to have a good conversation with Antonio and his family. McDyess comes back to campus. A couple of days of practice. Everybody's back in good graces. We beat the number one team in the country. And listen, the rest is history for Antonio McDyess. That was a good decision, but listen, he was frustrated, and it happens. I mean, that's one of those things that, man, I mean, over the course of a season, you got a lot of guys that have some ups and downs. And listen, it wasn't an attitude thing or anything. We loved McDyess, but we were losing. You mentioned the 3-5 record. I didn't realize it was that bad, and it wasn't like we were playing a Nate Oates caliber non-conference slate. I mean, it was kind of a weaker non-conference schedule. Nobody would have ever predicted that we would have beaten number one North Carolina. Number one Arkansas, and then go on to pretty good seed in the NCAA tournament. But the coaching move maybe of his career was David Hobbs making sure that Antonio McDyess was back in Tuscaloosa, back in Coleman Coliseum for that game against Arkansas.
I would agree with that one. That was probably the most important save that he did of the entire season. All right, let's switch to this then. So after your playing career, how did you end up getting involved with broadcasting? Is that something that you thought about while you were in school, or how did this all fall into place for you? Because I know you started first, I think, as the courtside reporter in 2004, and then just 1 or 2 years later, then you became the current analyst along with Chris. But how did your career in broadcasting develop post playing career?
Well, all right. So, and I know a lot of people know this. Chris, I mean, he came out of the womb wanting to be a broadcaster, and it's a big reason why he's so good. I mean, he knew it from the beginning that he wanted to be on the air and be a broadcaster. And man, he's one of my best friends, and he is the best at what he does. And I was not someone who ever thought about it. It might have been the last thing I ever would have wanted to do. I remember there weren't many times over the course of my college career that the media wanted to interview me after a game. But in the handful of times that they did, man, I was so nervous. I didn't want to talk in front of the camera. And it was just, it made me so nervous. And if you would have told me then when I was 19, 20, 21 years old, that I would be in my, whatever it is, 21st year of broadcasting with CTSN, I never would have believed you. I mean, I had no interest in it. It made me nervous. I didn't want to do it. But as I got a little older, and listen, I always thought I would be involved with basketball. My dad was a coach. I thought I was going to go into coaching, and I ended up going down a different path. And so it was, I was talking to Mark Godfrey, and there was an opportunity. They were talking about bringing on a former player onto the broadcast. And, he asked me if I'd be interested. And there were a handful of guys that kind of applied for the job, former players. And so I did. And I did some things on the radio, just kind of college basketball talk stuff, during March Madness, get on and talk about the tournament. I really enjoyed it, and it kept me connected to basketball. And listen, after when it was all said and done, and we went through kind of an interview process, and they listened to some tapes, and got the opportunity to first start on the sideline. There were I thought it was going to be as an analyst, started as a sideline reporter, and then some things moved at CTSN, and I was able to move into a spot that I personally enjoyed more as an analyst. As a former player, I want to look at the game in that way, and felt like that was more of my strength than an actual real reporter doing a sideline report. But was able to get into it and just loved it. Love working with Chris Stewart, is one of my best friends, and Tom Stike. We've all been together for so long. Those are great guys. We have such a good time together on and off the mic. And then Roger Hoover's joined the broadcast, and he's been great. But for me, I love being around it. I love Alabama. I love Alabama basketball. And not that ESPN would ever come calling, but if they did, I'm not sure I would even want to do it because I love basketball. I love broadcasting. But to be able to sit courtside and be the analyst for the program that I love is just incredible. I love every second of it. Nate Oates has been great to me. He allows me to come into practice and pick the coach's brains and just sit back and watch and learn what we want to do. And that might be my favorite part, is going to practice and watching our coaches coach. It's why I think they're the best in the country. But it's been such a blast. And when people ask me how long I've been doing it, it's now been so long, I'm not exactly sure. I think it's 21 years. But it's like when those words come out of my mouth, 20 plus years, it's like, wow, I can't believe it. But I'm honored to do it. I mean, listen, it is, I would say a dream come true, but it's not something I ever dreamed because I didn't necessarily want to do it, but it has been amazing. And I've loved every second of it. Even when we were losing, through some of the tough stretches, I still love doing it. I still love this program. If you listen to me during those times, you could hear the heartbreak in my voice. And, hopefully now you can hear the joy and elation. But it's been incredible. And I'm going to tell you, I appreciate these times. And I know, Michael, you do too. And those
Absolutely.
that are listening and watching, these are the diehard Alabama basketball people that love this program and have for a long time. And that's what's cool about this moment, is it's so special and we're so appreciative. And I know you feel the same way. And I know those that are watching and listening feel the same way. I mean, for your school to do it is awesome, but to be such around it and passionate about it for so long, and to go through those tough times, and then to be where we are right now makes this even more special.
So you are absolutely right. Look, we know Alabama will always be known as a football school, but I feel confident, and I think you may agree with me, but there has always been an underlying passionate fan base for basketball. Always. They have always been there. You've got a dedicated group that come to all the games. You see them when you're on the road. You'll always probably see the same people on the road games that try to get to every road game too, if they can afford it.
Yeah.
So there is a passionate fan base that has always cared about the program. And you're right, they've been there through thick and thin, which makes what's going on these last 5 seasons so enjoyable, because you know what some of them have gone through. I'm not saying that the younger generation hasn't paid their penance, but they probably haven't, not compared to what some of the others have gone through.
Listen,
So they're getting to enjoy. Yeah, they're getting to enjoy.
I'm happy for them. I'm happy for the younger generation. It's like I used to tell my daughters this. Who my oldest daughter is a senior at Alabama, and my youngest is going to be a freshman. They don't know a world without Nick Saban, without Alabama winning championships.
Yep.
They expect Alabama football to be dominant, and they didn't go through the DeBosch years, and so I'm glad they didn't. But for those of us who did, we have an appreciation for where Alabama football is. It's the same thing in basketball. Listen,
Absolutely.
if you didn't have to go through some of the tough times, I'm happy for you. But for those of us who did, it just makes us even a little more special.
Well, let me ask you this: as part of your duties as the analyst, along with Chris, what preparation is involved before every broadcast? What do you study and dig into to prepare for even those non-conference games? Maybe when you're playing a team, you're like, wait a minute, where are they at? Things like that. What goes into a broadcast for you?
Well, you talk about a labor of love. I mean, preparation is so much fun. Um, I've tried to sell my family on this for years. I have to watch all these games, and I have to go to practice, and I have to talk basketball all the time. It's preparation, listen, it is preparation, but man, it's so much fun. And I do more preparation in the non-conference than I do in the conference. And I say that, but I end up preparing by watching a ridiculous amount of games. I'm a basketball junkie. I love hoops a lot. I know you can relate. So listen, I prepare, but I'm sitting there and have this question asked to me at dinner and with friends and family. I'm like, well, I don't really spend that much time preparing. And then, I have a friend or my daughter jump in and is like, well, what about this, this, and this? I'm like, well, I don't really look at that as preparation. Watching 2 games a night, 7 days a week, is that preparation? Yeah, I guess it kind of is. But I'll say this: once we get into the season, I've watched us practice so many times. I've watched us play so many times. I like to talk to the coaches and the staff and listen. My secret weapon on preparation are our GAs. Our staff guys. I try not to bother Nate and our assistants any more than I already do. But when I can talk to our GAs, who are the young up and comers in this business, I mean, they're going to be the next great coaches in college basketball. They are in the weeds. They know this stuff backwards and forwards. They're watching film. They're staying up late, getting there early, and I love talking to those guys. And I get most of my information from them, and I'm appreciative to them. But it's so much fun to go to practice and talk to coaches and watch games and rewatch it, and watch film when I can, and I just love being around it. It's a lot of fun, and hopefully that comes through on the air.
So you in your broadcast career, so you came in, so you've covered Mark Godfrey, so then you had Coach Grant, Coach Johnson, and now Coach Oates. Now I know there was a period where Alabama basketball didn't probably live up to the standard that you and I were used to. I think Coach Johnson did an admirable job trying to get enthusiasm back with the program. He had that really good recruiting class. I mean, I think it was very important to get a player of the caliber of Colin Sexton, because that got a little juice back to the program, saying, "Wow, you got to look at this top recruit coming here." When Coach Oates came, and that first season, of course, ended with COVID, so you didn't get a chance to see them do anything in the postseason. What did you see? You talk about going to practice, talking to coaches and the GAs. Even though the team finished 16-15, what did you see about that first season from Coach Oates, Coach Hodgson, that staff? What did you learn from them in that first season?
Well, you knew early on that we had the right man as our head coach, and he brought in a great staff, and that once he was able to get the talent level and where it needed to be, and that didn't necessarily mean bringing in a bunch of new guys. Now, he was able to bring in really good players, obviously, but the players that were there and the development that guys like Herb Jones and John Petty in that group, that those guys got better. Kyra Lewis, obviously, he was able to develop talent at such a high level. I knew style of play would be attractive to players. I felt like after getting to know the staff, and obviously Petway was there, and Brian Hodgson and Charlie Henry, these guys were the best of the best, and that was proven as they've gotten Division I head coaching jobs. But to see the player development, knowing that the staff was in place to go out and get that talent, and that Nato's vision was to play a style that would be attractive, that mirrors the NBA, that's fun to play, that's going to get fans and players excited. But what really, I guess, was the biggest surprise is the player development is off the charts. And that's a big reason why you're able to go head to head with schools like North Carolina, Duke, Kentucky, and beat them in recruiting on players because of what guys do once they get to Tuscaloosa from a player development standpoint. And so I thought the program was going to be in incredible shape and have a chance to eventually go to a Final Four. But I'm still surprised with where it is. I mean, I thought it would be really, really good. But when you look at where Alabama basketball is from a coaching standpoint, from a roster standpoint, from a pipeline of players that are coming in, this is for the next 10 years, foreseeable future, one of the top programs in college basketball. And when you look back to 2 years ago, SEC champion, SEC regular season champion, number one overall seed, Sweet 16 team, you come back in maybe a rebuild and go to the Final Four. You lose a lot of players off of that Final Four team. And a lot of people around college basketball think Alabama is going to be the preseason number one team in the country. This thing is rolling. That's not a newsflash. We all know that. But to see that is incredible. And the best part is I don't see it slowing down. And it's because of what Nate Oates has built. It's the players that have come before these guys that have gone on to have success in college, and then obviously in the NBA and get better and work hard. And he's been able to attract the best players, but these guys that come to Alabama, I mean, it's so much involved in the hard work that it takes and the humility it takes, because he's going to coach you. These coaches are going to coach you hard, and guys come here wanting to be pushed and they want to be coached hard and pushed to the next level. And he's been able to do that. And so it's just incredible what's going on. But that's a really long answer to say what I saw when he first got here was a guy that can turn this into one of the top programs in the country. And that has happened in a big way.
So for me personally, this is how I kind of look at things. So the 2021 COVID season, for fans that had sat through the 10 to 12 years of kind of wandering in the wilderness, it's hard for me to even describe how much that season meant to me. That 2021 season, even though you had the crowd restrictions and everything else, to me is one of the all-time special seasons that I can remember about Alabama basketball. I mean, the 86-87 team is my favorite team. The 2021 is pretty darn close after that, just simply because of what they gave back to the fans that had waited so long. And we didn't see it coming, or you saw it coming because you saw the practices. The fans probably didn't see it coming. And then when it happened, I can't tell you, especially when they won the SEC tournament up in Nashville. 30 years, Brian. Did you think it would take 30 years for Alabama to win an SEC tournament after seeing what they did in the 80s and 90s?
Yeah, listen, that was a special team. And, those are the guys that helped turn this thing around and make Alabama basketball what it is today. And no, listen, that was such that game in Nashville against LSU, to be able to get to the championship game after winning the regular season. And there were a lot of, I know it was a restricted crowd, but there were a lot of Alabama people in the building. And it was emotional. I mean, we have the court cam now with CTSN where, they could see Chris and I and Tom's reaction. We didn't have that in Nashville during that SEC championship game. The last few seconds, we were up in the rafters because of COVID. I mean, literally, like the ceiling of the arena was right here. Bridgestone Arena ceiling was right here, and you're watching half the game from the video board. But when they missed those couple of shots and tipped it away and won the championship, I tackled Chris Stewart. I mean, he was calling the end of that game from down on the floor because I tackled him, and it was an incredible moment because it had been a long time, and that was a special game, special team that helped propel us to where we are right now.
I was right there with you. So we were up in Nashville. We were one of we were in the crowd restrictions, but we made it up there because we saw the Tennessee game, the comeback against Tennessee, and then we were there for the LSU game. And I was right there with you because when they won, after the horn sounded, it hit me that I hadn't seen this happen for 30 years. I took it for granted. I was a junior at Alabama when they won in '91, and then I was like, my gosh, I've waited 30 years to see this again. And I literally broke down in tears in front of my daughter, and she was just looking at me. And I lost it. I really did because it meant so much that game. And then, 2 years later, here comes yet another great team, the 22-23 team. All of a sudden, you're taking down number one teams. You've got the best array of talent I've ever seen. Now, granted, I only go back to like 82 and up. But to me, that was the most talented Alabama team I had ever seen. Now we'll see what this year's team is, but that team was the most talented. And I'll tell you, for this one, I thought for sure this was going to be the one that would get us to the Final Four. And then when I was there in Louisville at the KFC Yum Center after they lost the 9-point lead, I just stood there thinking, I guess we are cursed. We're never going to do it because if this team couldn't do it, then I don't know which Alabama team could. And I don't know, that was such I left the arena that night. I don't know. That was just such a weird feeling. And I was depressed. I was concerned and depressed, and I didn't know what to think because I thought everything, for all the bad seedings, for all the times we ran into the hot team, everything seemed to break Alabama's way. You had the 2, 3, and 4 seeds all get beat in the first 2 rounds. So what were your thoughts after that San Diego State game? Were you as dumbfounded as I was when it was all over?
You know what? I mean, it hurt because that was the best team in the country. But we all know how the NCAA tournament is.
It's painful.
It's what makes it the best tournament in the world. It's what makes it so painful, which it was that night in Louisville against San Diego State. But listen, I was, even after that game, and we talked about it, Chris and I have a couple times on the air this year. After that game, I was disappointed. I was disappointed for that team, but I really had a confidence in where we are as a program that it was going to happen. And we said in the post game, and I told Chris this, and he agreed, and Stipe did as well. Alabama basketball is now in a position to where we're not talking about if we're getting in the tournament. It's about seeding, and it's about matchups, and it's about playing well at the right time. This program is going to get to a Final Four. We're sitting courtside, devastated after the San Diego State loss. This team, and we said this team's going to get to a Final Four, and it's probably going to be in a year where we don't expect it, but it's going to happen. And I was really, really optimistic and really confident because I knew who was running the show, and I knew the types of players that are going to be wearing crimson and white for the foreseeable future. And I know the DNA of our program now. And this is a championship program. That was a championship team. Did go to a Final Four, wanted to make it past the Sweet 16, didn't. But that was 4 championships in just a matter of a couple of years when you combine tournament and regular season titles. And this is I knew it was a program that was eventually going to make a Final Four. And listen, I was right in that nobody predicted this past year of being a Final Four team, especially when went to the SEC, went one and done in the SEC tournament, and got drilled by Florida. I wasn't ready to predict a Final Four run, But in all the years that Alabama has not gotten the best draws, and I would say this, San Diego State is one of those teams I didn't want to see. Their style of play, their physicality, those were the types of teams that if you're not playing well on that particular night, you're going to have a tough time with. So although you're right, the top four seeds in front of you had lost. It wasn't as much about the seeding as it was the matchups. That wasn't a great matchup. I thought the matchups were really good for Alabama this year. Obviously, the team caught fire. Mark Sears, legend of the program, played as well as anybody in college basketball, and guys stepped up. Got a good matchup in round one, a team that wanted to run with you in Charleston. And then the second round matchup, I was worried about Grand Canyon, and rightfully so. And who would have predicted Mo Diabate step up and essentially win that game in the end? North Carolina, a team that Alabama has fared well against in recent years, and we'll see how that goes again this upcoming season. But out of all the number one seeds, I think you probably, or one of the top seeds, you would have picked North Carolina to play in a Sweet 16, and then Clemson in a revenge game. So, listen, I was thinking back to all those years that all those great teams that Alabama has had under Wimp Sanderson, even CM Newton having to play Indiana in the
76
round of 16, and then my first year doing radio, the 04 team, you run in to UConn, who was a dominant national champion in the Elite Eight. And some of the matchups that Alabama's had over the years, the matchups this time were more favorable. And then this team was playing at a high level. They believed in themselves and got to a first ever Final Four. But I knew it was going to happen. And I was the least shocked person when it did happen. But with that being said, I still look at some of my Final Four T-shirts that I wear almost every day and hats, and I'm like, man, we did it. We finally got there, and it's surreal because we've wanted it so bad for so long, and it finally happened. It was incredibly special, and the best part is that will not be our last trip to a Final Four.
So, looking back at the 24 season, the 23-24 season, I know a lot of people, kept harping on the defense, but so many people were just overlooking the fact that this team was putting up historical numbers on offense. I mean, something you hadn't seen since like 1956. They were coming out and just pouring it on when they could. And even on the nights that they weren't really hot, they were still doing quite well. So yes, maybe it wasn't a trademark NATO's defense, but it was a historical offense, something we had never seen. And I had no problem with the team leaning into that, especially when you got into tournament time. So was there any point, and I'm agree with you. I was in Nashville and I watched that terrible flame out against Florida. But if you look at it, to me, Florida was just a bad matchup for Alabama. They matched up really well against Alabama. And I didn't like that draw in the SEC tournament. But was there at any particular moment in those maybe first couple of games in the NCAA tournament, you said, okay, now this team has kicked it into another gear. Where did this come from?
Well, after that game, the SEC tournament, I wasn't sure it was that I needed to pack too much to go out to the West Coast in the NCAA tournament. But I mean, listen, I felt like, the North Carolina game. That was an incredible performance. And what was great about that game is, and this is why I think Nate Oates is one of maybe the best coach in the country. The game plan was so good, and North Carolina had a couple of non-shooters, and those guys, you almost acted like they weren't on the floor, and they got hot, and we were down double digits, and they stuck with the plan. And said, at halftime, we stick with the plan. We're winning this game. And I think they even gave the score. Like, the analytics show, if we continue to do this, we're going to win this game by this many points. And so there was a confidence in the locker room and a belief in the game plan and what they're doing. They executed it. and that was incredible. Now, with that being said, I have never been more nervous in my life. I mean, not that anybody would ever want me to play. I don't know that I could have played against Clemson because we're 40 minutes away from the
Mm-hmm.
promise
Yep.
against a beatable team. I mean, you could not have asked for more to be an Elite Eight. We've had so many Sweet 16s, as we talked about over the years. The one Elite Eight game against UConn, where you're a significant underdog. That was not the case against Clemson, and I was so nervous because I thought we could win. I thought we should win, and we could go to the Final Four. And Clemson came out hot, and that with Mark Sears and Jaron Stevenson after a tough game against his hometown team against North Carolina steps up huge on the biggest stage, the biggest game in Alabama basketball history was that Clemson game, and our guys played incredible and was able to come back and win and ultimately go to the Final Four.
Was it almost surreal while you were listening to Chris at the end of the game say the words "we're headed to the Final Four"?
Man, I'm pinching myself, and I want to go back and listen to that because I I don't. I mean, it was surreal. And Chris, I heard some of the highlights, but we did probably a 45-minute post game show interviewing players, coaches. Greg Byrne came over, talked to him, and it was just emotional. I'm not sure it was like, at least from my standpoint, professional as a broadcaster, but it was really emotional. And talked to Robert Horry came over, and who was a former teammate of mine, and it was really really special, surreal to go back in the locker room, hold the trophy. One of the assistant coaches gave us a piece of the net. I've got it in a trophy.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah, and then get to Phoenix, and I probably spent every dollar I ever earned with CTSN on Final Four gear. So which was well worth it. I've got decades saved up to spend on Final Four gear, and I bought it up.
Well, I'm right there with you. So, of course, before I got on the flight to go out there, I had to go make sure I had enough shirts to wear all the way through Monday night. So, I bought polos, t-shirts. And then when we got to Phoenix where we were staying, you were downtown where they were having all the convention center stuff. And the next thing you know, I'm over there buying. I had to get a program, I had to get magnets, had to get cups, had to get another shirt, had to get a luggage tag. I'd say I bought way too much stuff, but I agree with you on that one. All right, let me ask this last question because I know you've got to leave in a few minutes, but to get to the Final Four, the one thing that so many schools and had held against Alabama for decades, saying, "Hey, where's your Final Four? Come talk to me when you get there." For Alabama to finally do that, what does that mean historically for a program to me that has always been overlooked nationally for what it has accomplished?
And I think for you and I, for our fans, and we have, I think, two things. I think we have one of the most underrated basketball programs in the country that's never gotten its due. And I also think we have an underrated basketball fan base of some of the most knowledgeable and passionate basketball fans in the country. And so I think it puts a spotlight on that. I think it's an opportunity to showcase, yes, this is one of the top basketball programs in the country right now. We're at levels that we've never seen. And we're up there right now with some of the blue bloods of college basketball. When you look at recruiting, when you look at the Final Four and championships and what's projected for the future. But at the same time, and this is really cool, as someone who's been a part of the program for a long time, is now we're talking about Wimp Sanderson's teams. We're talking about the 76 team with CM Newton. We're talking about Robert Horry and Antonio McDyess, and we're talking about the success of this program. And it just puts a spotlight on all of it, which is so good. Yes, there's been ups and downs, but over the decades, this is the second winningest program in SEC basketball. I mean, this is a proud program that had a missing piece, and it was a big piece. And I don't want to diminish that. I mean, listen, this program needed to go to a Final Four. I knew it would happen. It took longer, a little longer than I thought over the decades. I thought we were going to do it in the early to mid '90s. It didn't happen, but we've done it now, and I don't think there's any stopping this program. But it's incredible to talk about Alabama basketball as a Final Four program. There are programs that have mentioned to us a time or two that this is a program that's not legit if you don't go to a Final Four. Well, I got some news for you. We're legit, and we're a Final Four program, and we're going to go back. And I hope it's this year. I don't know that it will be. It's a nature of basketball. You never know, but I know that the projections are that Nate Oates and Alabama basketball will be back in a Final Four, and hopefully very soon.
All right. So last question. So Final Four, which was always the ultimate glass ceiling that we thought for Alabama basketball. We thought we'd never get there. We've gotten there. So now there's only one thing left to do. That's win the whole thing one time. What would that mean to the athletic department to have a national championship in men's basketball?
Well, I mean, gosh, it would be off the charts. I mean, and listen, this team coming up is national championship good, and that doesn't mean you're going to win it. I think 2013 was the last time that a number one overall seed, Louisville, did it. A number one overall seed actually won the national championship until this year, where UConn did. So that's not the norm. But if you're in position, it was like, we talked about Chris and I talked about last year. If you're in position, if you have a team that can make a run and you're a quality program with great players and coaches, and you're in position, eventually you're going to break through. If you're a top 10, top 5, Alabama would be preseason 1 or 2 in the country, you give yourself a chance. And I think this program is going to give themselves a chance. And if things break the right way, it's hard to win 6 games in the NCAA tournament. But I believe this program can do it. I believe they will do it. And, I don't know when that'll be, but I hope I'm around for it. And when they do, there's going to be a lot of tears, a lot of joy. But I think it is going to happen, and I can't wait for it.
Well, Bryan, this has been a fast hour. I cannot thank you enough for coming on, and this has been a fun conversation. I enjoyed every minute of it. And again, I can't thank you enough for doing this, especially as we approach a holiday week coming up. I know your schedule's tight, but I thank you very much for this. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Well, I did as well, and it's always great to see you and get to talk Alabama basketball, and I appreciate so much what you do for this program. I mean, you put a spotlight on it, and we have a lot of new fans now, and you've been able to help shine a light on the history and all that this program has been for many decades. So as a former player, I very much appreciate what you do, and it's a privilege to be on with you.
Well, thanks again, Bryan. And again, look forward to this upcoming season. Hopefully we'll have more to talk about, and we'll do this again soon, hopefully.
I can't wait.
All right. Thanks, Bryan.